Imagine that every drop of water is a human life, and the cattle is a vast state. Now a dictator seizes power in this state. Aiming to fulfill their expansionist appetites by bringing society to a boiling point. Evaporate people's brains, instill fear, and transform them into beasts. Yes, I want to start a war with Ukraine. Drown these children, drown them. We want blood. I have decided to conduct a special military operation. This epitomizes the core task of totalitarian propaganda. Under the mask of propaganda, propaganda emerged simultaneously with language and religion. It existed even before humanity had a word for it. Julius Caesar was an outstanding propagandist of antiquity. He perfectly understood the psychological needs of the masses, the role of symbols, parades, and gladiatorial fights. The famous slogan "bread and circuses" was merely a method to distract the plebeians from the cruel realities of life. No ancient war was fought without propaganda and psychological operations. Even the Chinese thinker Sun Tzu, the author of The Art of War, described, without calling it psychological operations, of course, how to demoralize the enemy and spread rumors in enemy-controlled cities that everything is bad, about theft among their ruler and officials. The ruler of the Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan, managed to conquer vast territories also due to propaganda. He sent secret agents ahead of the combat units to spread rumors in which the strength of the approaching Mongol army was greatly exaggerated. Strength, numbers, power. Thus, the enemy was demoralized even before the main troops arrived to start the war. The term propaganda, which translates from Latin as "to be spread," appeared in 1662. At that time, the Vatican established the Congregation for Propaganda, which was supposed to spread the Catholic faith worldwide. There were the significant challenges to the Catholic Church during the Reformation, and traditional Catholicism was on the brink of collapse. Initially, the word propaganda did not carry negative connotations. During the Napoleonic Wars, the situation changed drastically. Propaganda became increasingly aggressive. The methods of demonizing the enemy were being honed. This was first employed in Spain. When Napoleon was fighting there, Catholic priests preached that he was either the Antichrist or his forerunner, rallying Spaniards to fight against him. A new unprecedented surge of propaganda occurred during the First World War. At that time, it took on an industrial, systematic nature. During the First World War, an educated individual was in the trenches, and they had to be given a completely different level of propaganda. Mad hatred and everything else, so to have the appropriate motivation to continue fighting. After the First World War, political populism became the primary element of propaganda. The old governments were subject to fierce criticism, and in their place came veterans and manipulators who subtly played on the fears and discontent of the populace, which leads to the formation of one of the largest and bloodiest empires of evil, Communist Russia. Lenin is a prime example of a political populist. He had specific promises for every stratum of the population. There was one type of propaganda for the villages, another for the cities, a third for the military, a fourth for the external world. And these propagandas were different for everyone, pouring into their ears what they wanted to hear. Similarly, Mussolini and Hitler were populists. They also twisted facts and shamelessly lied, promising small shopkeepers that they would destroy large grocery stores and the owners of large networks that they would eliminate retail trade. Both the Soviet Union and Germany elevated propaganda to a high level to ensure that the average mass person who had come to the proscenium was never left alone. It was necessary that they were continuously immersed in new information, with fresh details about the enemies of a perceived righteous order, and accordingly were brought up with such hatred. Advertisement flirts, agitation seduces, propaganda rapes. Ashot Nadanyan, Armenian chess grandmaster. There are three types of propaganda. White, which does allow any distortion of facts. Gray, which allows for slight distortions. And finally, black propaganda. It is entirely based on fabricated lies and spreads knowingly false information. In fact, propaganda can be like a knife, capable of cutting bread and killing a person. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, the Third Reich's Minister of Education and Propaganda, is considered the father of black propaganda. He once declared, "Give me the mass media, and I will turn any nation into a herd of swine." And Goebbels proved this in practice, transforming the Germans into a blind weapon in the hands of the Nazis. Lies were one of the main ideological components of Goebbels' policy. In 1967, Ron Jones, a regular history teacher at a California school, decided to test whether Goebbels' propaganda was really so powerful and effective. To interest teenagers, Jones invented a youth movement called the Third Wave, with a secret salute reminiscent of the Nazi Heil Hitler.
The Third Wave experiment lasted 5 days. Each day was dedicated to a specific Nazi slogan: strength in discipline, strength in cohesion, strength in action, strength in pride. The result shocked everyone.
Jones effortlessly created an organization of about 200 individuals, united by iron discipline, aggression, and hatred towards those who were not part of the third wave. The teenagers rapidly degraded, reporting on classmates without any remorse, and organizing repressions turning into a controlled, embittered mass. That is, the behavior of 16-year-old Americans was hardly different from that of average residents of Nazi Germany.
The experiment demonstrated how this propaganda mechanism works on completely different levels. How it is possible to play on human ego, ambitions, and herd mentality, and compel to do what the dictator wants.
Joseph Goebbels held a doctorate in philosophy and considered this science primary to propaganda. Therefore, we will pay special attention to the psychological aspect. We will consider which strings of the human soul each method plays upon. Goebbels' favorite propaganda method was the simplification of reality. The Nazi minister constantly emphasized that the majority of any society does not possess exceptional intellectual abilities, so there is no need to invent complex forms. There is a tendency that the smarter the gadgets, the dumber the people. And this maximum simplification, clip thinking, let's do it faster and faster, think in pictures. All of this ends up with people stopping even wanting to think. The artificially created picture of the world by propagandists should not have alternative interpretations. It must be exclusively black and white, easily understandable and even primitive. The language of the propaganda manipulator must also be simple. The fact is that every person has two parts: the adult, which is the intellect, and the child, which is the emotions.
It is much harder to find the keys to the adult part. Therefore, it is easier to manipulate the child part. This is what propagandists and manipulators do, appealing to our emotions to make you feel like a child, so that it is easier to revert you to this child state and impose what is needed.
A lie repeated 1,000 times becomes the truth. To ensure better retention of the material, Goebbels applied the method of repeated repetition. The necessary information must be abundant, and it should sound from every iron. Modern neo-Nazis have seized power in Ukraine. We are witnessing a descent into fascism.
Significant part of Ukraine and its people have been captured by the madness of Nazism.
It is an utterly fascist regime, and these are fascist armed forces. The Nazis attacked, so defense is needed. When in front of you are people of different backgrounds and ages, it is necessary to convey the same thought through various approaches. One must say something for retirees, for students, for workers, for IT professionals, for city and village residents. Besides political platforms and media outlets, propagandists assign a significant role to spreading rumors. Sociologists say that the lower people's trust in official media, the higher their trust in gossip. Special attention to this source of propaganda was given by Soviet special services. KGB agents at train stations and markets, places with the highest concentration and foot traffic, would walk around spreading various rumors and gossip with a certain political aim. And then, people who heard it would start spreading it throughout the country. In marketing, there is a theory of 7 contacts. If a person hears the same information 7 times, they involuntarily start to believe in its truth. This works very actively with Russians. For example, they hear about it at school, it is talked about on TV, written about on the internet, discussed in kitchens, and at work among colleagues. There, it's not just 7, but 777 contacts, and a person starts to perceive it as established facts. In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted an interesting experiment. He selected several dozen students allegedly to test their vision. They had to find identical vertical lines on 2 cards. Each group consisted of 7 standing actors and 1 actual subject, who always responded last.
Despite the obviousness of the choice, 80% of the subjects during the experiment repeated complete nonsense after the provocateurs. It was noticeable that they were anxious, nervous, and disoriented.
After this, Solomon Asch slightly changed the rules of the experiment. Instead of 1 actor, he introduced another regular student. The presence of at least 1 ally drastically changed the statistics. Now 50% of the subjects held their point of view.
Solomon Asch's experiment proved that people are afraid of being in the minority. In psychology, there is a concept called the Robinson Crusoe syndrome. When a person is alone, they start to feel extraordinary inner discomfort, which intensifies over time. Propagandists take advantage of this and try to offer people what they need, namely to be in a group, to be in society, to be in their pack.
The next method of propaganda is based on the effect of the crowd. The bandwagon effect. It is very often used by Kremlin mouthpieces, convincing their population of an inevitable, crushing victory. We will defeat and kill everyone, rob whoever we need to, and everything will be as we like it.
Here they play on several psychological points. Firstly, a person feels comfortable being with others. Secondly, a person doesn't like to miss an opportunity, and when they are told that they will miss an opportunity, they lust offer. If they don't act today, they instinctively want to seize it.
Christ is rising. He's rising indeed. Let this American rebel not meddle here. Let them know and fear. Russia defended itself and never attacked anyone.
Because Russia is the pearl in the shell. God forbid we get another president, you know? Death to the Chochols, death to the Bandera traitors.
The bandwagon effect played a key role during the mobilization for the war with Ukraine. Besides the narratives of Kyiv in 3 days and let's throw our heads in the air, propagandists manipulated male pride by conducting a powerful advertising campaign, BMN. A confidence was thrown into Russian society that there would be a small victorious war, that there would be a victory, that in Ukraine one could not only earn a lot of money but also improve their social status, become a hero, receive a medal and even loot, steal a washing machine, a TV, a computer. Propaganda is an art that is more effective the less people realize they are being psychologically processed. Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda of the Third Reich. Another favorite method of the Nazis was the big lie. Its essence lies in spreading some global disinformation with the utmost degree of confidence. The lie must be so terrible, so big, that people simply cannot believe that one could lie so much. It's impossible to lie about such things.
My son is being dressed up as Putin, and people are lining up to rape my 4-year-old boy.
Sociologists claim that fake news filled with shocking lies spreads much faster than the truth.
Usually, fakes contain some sensational, vivid information, and therefore people perceive them more acutely, share this fake information with each other, and, like a wave, spread it further. Thus, fakes fill the information space, leaving no room for the truth.
Another important principle of propaganda for any totalitarian dictatorship is the cult of personality, the cult of the leader.
The cult of the leader's personality is designed for weak, dependent people who constantly look up to someone greater, older, more responsible, who can control their lives. Of course, on one hand, it is convenient because you can sit and do nothing, but on the other hand, a person becomes just a puppet, doing what the same leader needs. Russia is our mother, and Volodymyr Volodymyrovich Putin is Volodymyr the Red Sun. He is our priest.
In fact, the slave psychology has been instilled in the Russian people's mentality for centuries. When serfdom was abolished in the Russian Empire in 1861, Ukrainians cried with happiness. Russians cried with misery. They went on their knees, stood under the landlords' houses and begged, "Master, don't let us go." A collective Russian is a person who can only live within restrictions, with some master over them. Not a host, but a master who treats them like a dog. But they love them even more for it. The more you are beaten, the more you love. Furthermore, Kremlin ideologists released a three-headed Cerberus that instills in Russians the idea that Russia's existence without Putin is impossible. These are mass media, church, and education. Our advantage is not in oil and gas, but in Putin. In Russia, no head of the church, Christian or Muslim, can be elected to the position without coordination with the special services. In fact, the churches have turned into ideological points for brainwashing and cultivating hatred towards other peoples. Go boldly to fulfill your military duty. And remember, if you give your life for your motherland, you will be with God, in His kingdom, in His glory, in His eternal life. In no Orthodox church has the cooperation, the symphony between the state and the authorities led to the church simply becoming a mouthpiece of religious Nazism. Propaganda is the art of photographing the devil without hooves and horns. Hans Casper, a contemporary German philosopher. The next principle of propaganda is 40 to 60. It is the right balance between truth and lies. If you add 1/4 truth to 3/4 lies, people will definitely believe you. During the Second World War, the 40 to 60 method was actively used not only by the Nazis, but also by British radio stations, particularly BBC Radio. The weather forecast was initially created precisely for this method. Today and tomorrow they said sunshine, then rain. That is, there was no doubt about the source of the information and its veracity. But then news that affected the morale of the military began to be mixed into the weather forecasts. The Russian ideological machine works in a similar manner. Fabricated information, invented sources and distorted quotes are added to the materials. They particularly enjoy twisting articles from, for example, genuine authoritative publications such as the New York Times or the Washington Post, etc. They take and reference an article, but can twist and turn the content of the publication on its head or extract something out of context. Appeals to authority is another crucial principle of propaganda. Are you not aware of this? Such people lend significance and status to misleading information.
Appeals to authority is an intriguing psychological mechanism. When we start listening to someone presented as authoritative, we attribute to them a whole range of qualities. We think they're not only expert, but also wise and kind, and they are worth following. Thus, when a singer or a media personality express their opinion, people perceive it as the ultimate truth.
It is important that authorities appear solid, speak vividly, and enchant the audience, as charismatic personalities garner the most trust. This was visually demonstrated by the organizers of the Dr. Fox effect experiment in 1970. An authoritative scientist, Myron Fox, delivered a lecture to certified American psychologists and psychiatrists. The audience was captivated by his emotional and competent narration. However, it turned out that Fox wasn't a scientist, but a talented actor with minimal understanding of medical terms, and his lecture profanation was a nonsensical set of contradictory statements.
The Dr. Fox effect experiment proved that what matters is not what the speaker says to a broad audience, but how he says it. And a charismatic personality can instill things that are completely untrue if he speaks confidently and vividly. If this charismatic speaker turns out to be a dictator, he can make an entire nation an obedient weapon in his hand.
A bright example is Adolf Hitler. He was a manic charismatic, holding tens of thousands of people with the power of his voice and turning them into utterly senseless fanatics who willingly fought and died for the Führer. For the mobilization of Russians, the ideologists of Rashism employ various propaganda methods. One of them is euphoria, the cult of ancestors. This is a constant reminder of greatness and past victories to boost the fighting spirit of contemporary Russians. They had their consciousness completely replaced over 20 years. They were plunged into some kind of matrix. Wherever you go, the Kremlin's opinion is confirmed. Cinema, theater, music, space, sports, everything has been infused with triumphalism for the last 20 years. Bring back Stalin, he is our generalissimus, he is to stand by Sevastopol. Happy Victory Day, hurrah! Russian ideologists long sought a compromise date for the general consolidation of society. And Victory Day met all the criteria. It is a hook on which every Russian can be caught, as the Second World War affected almost every Russian family. Kiev is a Russian city, Warsaw is a Russian city, Berlin is a Russian city. One of the horrible features of war is that all the war propaganda, lies and hatred come from people who are not fighting. George Orwell, British writer and author of novels on totalitarianism. The next method of propaganda, the unknown hero, has deep psychological roots and consists in the predominantly fictional heroization of one's armed forces. Today, the Russian army is the most modern in the world. Our polite people are the best prepared, the best dressed, and in 5 years it has become the best army in the world. War evokes enormous resistance in the human psyche. Therefore, it is important for propagandists to elicit such strong emotions in people that they overshadow fear, the instinct of self-preservation.
To suppress these protests, propagandists use heroization. They create the image of an unknown hero endowed with virtues and merits, which of course evokes admiration in people. Then they instill in him the trait they need. For example, readiness to die at the first command. Accordingly, people admire this hero, want to emulate him and try to follow him in everything.
In Russia, the stamping of fictional heroes has long been streamlined, and the roots of this falsification stretch deep into history. The very structure of the Russian army assumed that at one time the Tsar would issue a decree to landlords. If there is a war, every 400th serf has to be sent to the army for 25 years. And the Russian landlord gave away the worst he had. The one who fought, drank, caused trouble, swindled, and set fire. And their army consisted of such scum. An army of the masses where there is no initiative. There is no initiative, there are no heroes.
War is love. War is a friend. War is a future embedded in the world.
From a young age, Russians are groomed to become sacred victims of the dictatorial regime, with much talk about the Young Guard, Zoya Kosmodemyanska, and other mythical pioneer heroes. If the Supreme Commander called for the final battle, Uncle Vova, we're with you! Children are just as easily influenced by the crowd as adults. And this was proved by the Ukrainian scientist Valeria Mukhina in her psychological experiment Both White. In 1971, she decided to test the veracity of Solomon Ash's research using white and black pyramids instead of cards. According to an agreement with Mukhina, 3 planted children would claim that both pyramids were white.
What color are the pyramids? Both are white. Enrico, look what the color are the pyramids. Both are white. Mikola, what the color are the pyramids? Both are white. Olenka, what color are the pyramids? Both are white. The pyramid experiment shows that from a young age a person feels comfortable being part of a group, being like everyone else. And to achieve this, they are willing to lie, to adapt, compromise their own conscience so as not to be rejected. This behavior model then transfers into adulthood, where the adult individual loses their self.
The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Steve Biko, South African politician and anti-apartheid activist. The next method is enemy demonization. This is, so to speak, the flip side of the unknown hero method. If one's own army is heroic, noble, follows the rules of war, rescues and liberates, then the opponent is the opposite. That is, they are cowards, they are puppets, they are war criminals, Nazi scum, Bandera filth, Satanist bastards, devils.
Only total denazification, total demilitarization.
They are enemies, they are on the side of evil.
In a hot war, we will defeat Ukraine in 2 days.
The methods of unknown hero and enemy demonization always work in a tight tandem. A hero can't exist without an enemy, just as an enemy without a hero. Enemies effectively activate negative emotions, and it's easy to make scapegoat out of them.
We don't want to admit that we live poor, live badly, live in poverty because of our own laziness or bad work or alcoholism. No, I would rather blame everything on NATO, Western enemies, Ukraine, anyone but ourselves.
However, an external enemy alone is not enough for propagandists. There must also be an internal enemy which performs an equally important function.
An internal enemy is needed to show people what awaits those who oppose. But witnessing show trials, lynchings, elimination, physical eliminations of dissenters, any desire to oppose is blocked.
Since the onset of the full-scale invasion, the main tool for demonizing Ukrainians has been PSYOP, psychological operations. When they identify a vulnerability that concerns us in one way or another, they attempt to insert their own additional narratives and amplify them using algorithms as much as possible.
They took a 3-year-old child, a little boy. In his panties and t-shirt, they nailed him to a wooden board like Jesus, with one nailing and 2 holding him.
Another method that plays a key role in the enemy's demonization: hanging labels. Each opponent and enemy in Russia has their own label. We often hear about Ukrops, Anglo-Saxons, Wahhabis, neo-Nazis, and so on. This is a hallmark of Russian propaganda.
In Ukraine, I can't even name it. There is no Ukraine. It is led by an Americano, fascist, Bandera government.
Russian propagandists depict Ukraine as a pseudo-state and use words that evoke only negative associations with Ukrainians. Nazi scum, Bandera filth, Ukrainian Nazi bastard pretending to be a state.
By labeling, propagandists objectify those they speak of, because killing an Ukroп does not make Russians think of them as a person with feelings, values, a soul, family, relatives.
Years of psychological processing on Russian children have yielded results. A large portion of the soldiers currently fighting in Ukraine belong to the so-called Putin generation, who were born, grew up, and became brutal under his rule. What do we want? Blood. What will we do? Kill. How does an ordinary person become a fierce beast? The Serbian artist Marina Abramovic tried to find the answer to this question. In 1974, she conducted the social experiment "Do Whatever You Want with Me." This performance was later repeated by various people in different countries, and each time, the result was identical.
The essence of the experiment is that the object stands still for several hours with various tools around them, from flowers to knives and whips.
Passers-by are allowed to take any of these items and do whatever they want with the object. Initially, the audience was shy, not showing much aggression. But then they went into a frenzy, trying to inflict as much pain and suffering on the object as possible.
The experiment demonstrated that under favorable conditions, when the victim doesn't resist, our animal instincts and desires to dominate, hurt, and act aggressively towards the defenseless can awaken within us, because inside each of us there are animal instincts.
According to statistics, 94% of families own a TV, while 90% have a bathroom. This implies that brains are washed more frequently than anything else. Robert Orban, American humorist. Next, we have the rotten airing method. It consists of coming up with the dirtiest, most scandalous accusation and dragging as many experts and viewers into the discussion as possible.
For 8 years, the residents of Donbass have been subjected to violence and abuse by the Ukrainian military.
This method works because over time the lies fade from people's memories, but the reputation of the targeted by the fake is tarnished, and that stench of the rotten airing remains.
Sometimes fakes work better than non-fakes.
In the case of this method, the psychological factor is at work. The first impression lasts the longest. When competing messages appear, a person still tends to favor the first one they received. As we have mentioned repeatedly, the main task of black propaganda is to influence emotions, not logic. And the excessive emotions method helps with this. When people are overwhelmed by emotions, logical thinking automatically shuts down. That is why most Russian presenters fight in hysterics and screech like pastors of totalitarian sects. Satan! I anathematize you. The more presenters scream, the faster viewers become emotionally exhausted. Within minutes, critical thinking is turned off. The person can no longer resist propaganda.
War for Russia! Motherland!
Another important element of emotional pressure is a distorted reality, a befuddlement with a flow of contradictory information to completely scatter the truth and create a pseudo-reality. For example, with Bucha, everyone saw that Russians tried to turn it into a fake by throwing out various versions of what happened. There were hundreds of different versions, so that a person became exhausted and said, "I can't figure it out. Probably everything is not accurate." Russians constantly distort history and the present, injecting narratives like "it's not so clear-cut" and "we'll never know the whole truth." The key goal of Russian propaganda is to disorient and confuse people to the extent that it simply suppresses the will to learn something and understand it. Glory to Russia! Glory to Putin! Crimea is ours! Russian propagandists' informational attacks provoke adrenaline fatigue, emotional burnout, stress, and chronic depression. This, in turn, leads to chemical changes in the body, that is, physical illnesses. The key point in dealing with black propaganda is to realize at some point that it is no longer you scrolling through the feed, but the feed scrolling you. If you feel the need to check the news feed every 15-20 minutes, it indicates that you are already addicted to the information flow. Therefore, switch to other activities: reading, socializing, walking. If a news item evokes such strong emotions that you want to share it with someone, it should trigger a stop red button. After that, we turn on critical thinking and verify the information through other sources. In the next episode, You will learn how the ideologists of Russianism use the propaganda method of repeated repetition to turn Russians into an army of zombies. And what role the bandwagon effect played during the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.